Has it started? Yes. Hello, fellow Lobsters. Welcome to the next episode of Our Level Love of Literature. And today we have with us Miss Anne-Marie Wells, an author. Specifically, let's call her a poet because I was going through her bio and that's what I felt like she was. Uh, I'd request Miss Jayanti to give a formal introduction about Miss Anne.
Yes, welcome, Anne. Anne Mary Wells is an award-winning queer poet, playwright, memoirist, and storyteller navigating the world with a chronic illness. She earned the Peter K. Hixson Award in poetry through Writers Relief and the Milestone Award through Wyoming Writers. She was nominated for Wyoming Woman of Influence in the arts category for amplifying the voices of LGBTQ and disabled communities in Wyoming through her writing. It's very impressive. So she is the lead faculty member for the Community Literature Initiative DC chapter and strategic partnership fellow for the Poetry Lab. Welcome, Anne, to LOL today. Let's have an memorable discussion. Look forward to. Welcome to LOL.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Ms. Anne, the first question that we would like to ask you is, usually memoirs are non-fiction and they're mostly written as prose, right? And when I read your bio and read a small blurb of your book, The Survived, which you have survived by, right? Yeah, that's the name of the book. And when I read that small write-up that you had given us about Survived by, I understood that it was a memoir which was written in the form of poems and verses.
That's right.
And you have written about grief in that. So can you tell us about how it was to write a memoir in the form of poems? Because it's new, because it's not common. So can you tell us how that process was and why you picked?
In fact, I've come across memoir through poetry for the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm glad to have been the first for you both. I honestly have only encountered memoir in verse one other time through Jacqueline Woodson's collection called Brown Girl Dreaming. And it's more geared toward a middle grade or young adult audience. My book is not geared to younger readers. It's geared toward adult readers. And the memoir itself began as prose, actually. It began as blog posts that I wrote, more so to have a catharsis. One, I had all of these thoughts, all of these feelings happening. I had just found out my father had terminal cancer. He was given a year to live, and processing that internally felt impossible. I needed to get it out of me. At the same time, I had very caring and very well-meaning friends wanting to know how I was, wanting to ask questions about what was happening. And I didn't have the emotional capacity to interact with every single person who was trying to call or send an email or a text message. And being able to broadcast these blog posts so that my friends can read them and they don't have to call and they don't have to ask, and they can learn from my sharing through the blogs, just helped me so that I didn't have to navigate telling the story dozens of times to each individual person. And as I was going through this journey of first my father's diagnosis and then his very quick deterioration, his death and grieving, I discovered poetry in that very short period of time. I hadn't written poetry before this. I was more of a playwright. I was working on a prose memoir about my time traveling through Iceland. I had never really explored the genre of poetry. And it was when my father was in the hospital, he had sepsis and pneumonia on top of his lung cancer. I thought it was the last day he was going to be on this earth. He was unconscious with tubes connected to him as they were pumping antibiotics through his IVs. And I was sitting on a little sofa next to his bed in the middle of the night, and I was compelled to write a poem about it. I don't know why. I tell people a ghost told me to do it because I had never really written poetry aside from being in an English class and it was an assignment or something like that. So I borrowed a pen. I didn't have a pen. I went to the nurse's station, borrowed a pen, and started writing a poem on the back of a receipt that I had in my bag. And that was my first inkling that I would even ever write poetry. And then suddenly I was obsessed with poetry from that moment on. As my dad got sicker, he decided to no longer pursue treatment. He was recommended for hospice, and I was caring for him and staying with him in his hospice room every day. He was watching the news and listening to country music, and I was writing poetry just compulsively. And as that journey continued after he passed, I really didn't write anything else. I didn't write any plays. I wasn't working on my memoir. I was really focusing on poetry. I ended up leaving my full-time job that I had in order to take on a less stressful and lower key caregiving position so that I could go back to school part-time to get my degree in English, which I was able to do because of the pandemic. Everything became virtual and remote. And so I was able to take all of these classes online that I wouldn't have been able to take where I was living in Wyoming, which is a very rural area, and there's no university here or anything. So I was able to take classes, and then a friend of mine recommended me for this poetry class called the Community Literature Initiative. And now poetry was really becoming the essence of who I was. I was reading poems every day, writing poems every day, trying to learn as much as I could about the craft of poetry. So then when it came time to curate this collection, and I had so many poems about my dad, it just felt natural that I would combine my story that I had already written through my blog posts and my poetry. Except my blog posts were mostly written before I discovered poetry. And so they were more casual, they were more, bloggy. They were just a log of my day-to-day. There wasn't really imaginative language, there wasn't descriptive imagery. And so I ended up taking those original blog posts, lots of crying, so much crying during this, rereading it, but then inputting my new self into those old posts, taking my new knowledge of the writing craft and putting that knowledge and those insights into this old writing to create what this collection is now. So the foundation and the skeleton is the same. It's the same story, and it's from my perspective, of course. And now there's this new language that is woven throughout it so that it feels more poetic and less like a captain's log, day 2, 7:15 a.m. That kind of feel. So I think the question was, how was it writing a memoir through poems?
Yeah.
And it was, I would say that it was more that I revised my memoir through poems. They weren't originally written that way. And so instead, through the revision process, they were re-sculpted, transformed into poems more so than they were that way in the first place. That was a long way to answer that question.
No worries. You can
That's
answer
fine.
the way you wish
That's all
to.
right.
Now,
Yeah.
we all know human beings in a very crucial moment. We get some sort of a coping mechanism. We know, and it's mostly very trivial, like coping a depression through eating, overeating, and such funny things. We know. But here, on one particular night, you are getting, from the universe, a coping mechanism in the way of poetry. That itself is so poetic for me. Now, I mean, to get a coping mechanism naturally is one thing. For you to pursue it further and to bring your memoir into the poetry form is what I appreciate. And I think that's one takeaway that aspirants should look for. So now let's come to this publishing part of this memoir. So how did you publish? Was it traditional or self-publishing? And if it was traditional, did you go through a literary agent? And were there any rejections? How was it perceived? Because it's a totally new genre, memoir and poetry. So how was it perceived by the literary agents or publishers? Can you share with us?
Sure, yes. And I loved what you said about poetry as a coping mechanism. I had never thought of it that way, but you're 100% correct. And it's what I still use as a coping mechanism. As soon as something happens, I need to write about it in a poem. Happy, sad, in the middle, neutral, angry, all of the emotions. I just, see a cute dog on the street, I write a poem about it, But in terms of the publishing, it did take a long time. Well, I shouldn't say that, because I know some people who spend 7, 8 years publishing one collection, sometimes 30, right? So it didn't take that long. My original collection of Survived By didn't incorporate this memoir in verse. It was only poems. And in addition to the poems about my father and his illness, I wrote about my relationship. So throughout this this time in my life, I was engaged to be married, and we were trying to have a wedding before my dad passed away.
Okay.
He ended up passing away shortly before the wedding, and we canceled everything, which glad that happened, because we ended up breaking up and it was not a good match. But
okay.
and the second part of my original collection was this other journey of falling in love with this person, and then things kind of being rocky between us, and then the deterioration of our relationship.
Okay.
And so the original collection was broken up into 6 chapters that were alternating between what was happening in my life with my father and what was happening in my life with my relationship. And after I had curated this collection, I sent it out to, literally, I'm not joking, 120 independent presses that publish poetry all over the United States, Canada, in the UK. I sent it to anywhere that I learned accepted poetry manuscripts. I sent it to them, and I got nothing but no's. Nothing but no's. And it was discouraging, sure. And I also maybe had the humility to know that I was a beginner. I had only just started writing poetry, so I maybe still had a lot to learn. And so I spent a year sending out my manuscript to places. And, after the 120th rejection, I said, maybe I need to go through and revamp this collection. It's not working the way that I currently have it. And that's when I decided to scrap this subplot about my relationship and having these poems interweaving with, the deterioration of that relationship and my heartbreak and, all of that. I decided to take that out. That belongs somewhere else. It doesn't belong in this collection. The title is Survived By. It's only about my father. It needs to be only about that one thing and not be muddled with this other thing. And I still, after I did that, I still received rejections on it. So that's not to say that I made this change and then just instantaneously it, was picked up. That's not what happened. I still was sending it out to many different places and was still receiving no thank you. But then I received a yes. So I sent it out to an indie publisher, one that a friend of mine had published her book through the year before. And actually her collection also was kind of like a memoir, but not a memoir in verse. Just the poems were more cataloged along her life, and a lot of it had to do with her father's death, also to cancer, but a different kind. And so she sent me the notification that her publishing house was accepting manuscripts, and she said, "You should try. Why not?" It doesn't cost anything to submit. So, there's the worst that can happen is that I get another no, which now I'm so used to it, it means nothing. And so I sent my manuscript in, I believe in April of 2022. And then the director or the founder of the publishing house, her name's Raven White. She sent me an email saying she'd like a meeting. So then it's like, okay, well, if she wants a meeting, it's probably good news, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And so yeah, we had a meeting and she let me know that she would love to publish the collection. And then even after that, there was still revisions made. So there was still a revision process of going through the poems again, checking the line breaks, like little minutiae too. And then I added poems, I took poems out. So even the collection that I had originally sent to this publishing house still then ended up being slightly different at the end. So, and then it just came out in April of this year. So maybe like a full calendar year from me submitting it, then it came out, which is also kind of fast. I know a lot of folks who they get an acceptance and then they wait more than a calendar year for their book to come out. By then they're already starting a whole new work in progress. They've forgotten about that collection.
Yes, of course. Yes.
So, so I just wanted to ask you, what usually happens in poems or even when you write a memoir, especially about grief, is that the time period of even writing this memoir or conceptualizing this memoir happened after the actual grief, when you are actually trying to heal yourself or when you're trying to become all right from that grief is when it's usually written. But for you, it was written, it started when you were expecting the grief, during the grief, and after the grief. So there are three stages of grief, and
Mhm.
there are three stages of coping with that grief that you have gone through, and you have written about it. So was there I understand that, as Ms. Jayanti said, that it was a coping mechanism and that was healing through it after the grief. So were there times when you were writing or when you were expressing those, even as a blog, were there times that, because grief is very personal, were there times that people could not absolutely relate to any word in that, and were just like,
Mm.
what is she even talking about?
Mhm.
What are you trying to
Yes.
tell us? So were there conversations like that?
Yes, and aren't those people blessed who they can read somebody's deep pain about grief and have no idea what that feels like? That must be a very blessed life. Um, yes, so to answer the first question, the idea to write this memoir in verse and have a poetry collection about this time period in my life did come afterward. And before I was a poet, I was a storyteller and I did write. I wrote mostly plays at the time and told stories, just oral storytelling. And my parents knew this, my family knew this about me. And one time when I was in hospice with my father and I was giving him a bath, a sponge bath in his hospice bed. He's very vulnerable position, being the parent being taken care of by the child. And I'm not really, paying much attention. I'm just kind of in my own world. We're quiet. And then he said, if you want to tell stories about this, you can.
Mm.
And it felt more not so much permission, but almost urging me to. It
Okay.
felt like he was telling me to tell this story. And later on, I wouldn't say that I'm in this like after grief world. I'm still in the grief. It's been 3 years. I'm still in the grief. There's still times that I read portions of my book and I cry. I miss my father. And I feel bad for the person who wrote it. I feel bad for the girl who's so sad about losing her dad. I feel bad for her. And I cry thinking of my own grief and just feeling bad for myself. That I was so deep in it that I was borderline non-functional in the world. And there haven't been many people who have told me that my collection has meant nothing to them, right? I feel like if it means nothing to them, they're going to keep it to themselves because it's such uh, a touching and difficult, vulnerable topic that you really have to be a robot or a stone to read about someone's grief and
Grief
be like,
and
well,
not
I didn't
relate.
get it at all. Um, and the people who have gone out of their way to share with me that it has been meaningful are, of course, those who have experienced loss in a deep way like this, that they lost a parent, they lost a parent figure, or they lost a partner. They know what that kind of dread feels like as they're reading my words about this anticipation that this death is going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, it's going to happen. That's what I hear a lot from people that they're touched by most. And yeah, this process has, in at least in me, has created a deeper sense of empathy. Even when I think about the individuals in my life who have done me wrong or who I find obnoxious, or at any time in my life I harbored resentment or bitterness toward them. Now I just have this softness because I know that they're going to suffer especially if I learned that they have suffered in this way, then whatever ill feelings I was feeling toward them in the past have now completely dissipated, because I know what that terrible pain and that trauma feels like. Did I answer the question?
You did, you did.
Okay,
I mean,
okay. I feel like I
think
kind of went off on a
no,
tangent,
no,
but I
no,
think
no.
That's okay,
No, no, no. Feel free. As a human, anyone, I think, when they touch the peak of pain or loss, the other things become nothing. You know? And that's
I
what you
agree.
mean. I think that's what had happened in you. That
Mhm.
aside, how was this collection, this book, received by a friend? I mean, not friends and close circles, that is one, but a stranger, total stranger who happens to be a poetry lover. And
reader.
did you get any review from such a person from any place in the world? And how was it? How did the person read your poetry, and how did the person relate to that? How was the review? How many reviews have you received? Can you share with us?
I haven't received too many professional reviews yet, though
Yes.
I'm very open to sharing my collection with anybody who is interested in writing a professional review. They can get in touch.
Danya writes poetry well, and she's a brilliant reader. Catch hold of
I'm
her.
happy to share my PDF copy with you. I have received mostly the reviews, like on Amazon or Goodreads, have exclusively come from my friends. So
Okay.
of course they're going to gush on it.
Mhm.
However, my sister, who is maybe my number 2 fan, I feel like my number 1 fan is my partner, who's
Okay.
over there listening to his own podcast over there. But my number 2 fan, and she has sent my collection to numerous friends of hers that I don't know, who she knows experienced loss. And she shared at least 2 messages that she received from these people. One individual whose father passed away in a bike accident. He was hit by a car while he was riding his bike. And very different situation from a terminal illness versus one day you have your person, the next day you don't. And another individual who lost his mother, also in a vehicle accident, but she was in the hospital for a long time before she passed away. And both individuals wrote to her, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for sending me this collection. It has meant so much to me. And they're not saying it to me, they're saying it to her. And the expression of gratitude in these individuals feels so earnest. It's not just, oh, thanks for sending me this. It feels much more heartfelt. And that's really why I wrote this collection, is that I wrote the collection that I needed to read, that
Exactly.
in the midst of this grief and loss,
Yes.
I needed this expression of what that feels like, the chaos in my mind, where one minute I can be laughing hysterically and the next minute sobbing hysterically, where I will not even get out of bed to brush my teeth for a week, and then I'm hyper focused on writing poetry and I'm doing that nonstop, and having this very extreme high and low, and all of it in between as well, and finding coping mechanisms. I talk about coping mechanisms in this book a little bit, and having other people that I don't know, of course my sister knows them, but I don't know them, say that yes, it resonated with them, even if they're not professional reviewers and the review is not in the New York Times or Washington Post or any other famous periodical. It still is very touching to know that at least I supported one other person in their journey, in their grief journey, knowing that they felt seen, knowing that my words touched them in a way that other words hadn't yet.
Mm-hmm.
That tells me that I fulfilled my mission. That was the goal of this collection, and
Absolutely.
knowing that I have reached that goal with, at least a handful of individuals
Yeah,
is very meaningful to me.
It's a ripple
Reviews,
effect. It will increase
yeah.
over time.
Reviews
Yes.
don't have to be from professional reviewers. Review is a review.
Yeah,
Whoever it
review is
comes
a
from,
review.
and
Review is a
review
review. Yes.
yeah,
Review
because
I
anything.
agree.
even if it were a professional reviewer, they're gonna review your writing style. They're gonna review your the actual creation. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
a normal reviewer, but is just a reader, he's gonna review the feelings that are emoted in the poem. So I
Yes.
think that
Mm-hmm.
that's any author's dream. We wish that they got what we felt. We don't wish that our work is like cut down and then and judged in pieces. We just wish that one more person reads our work and is like, I understand what she means. It just makes me cry. Every author, every creator wishes someone looks at their poem or like their art and emotes. None of us wish for it to be broken down into pieces and be judged. So a review
I
is
mean,
a review, and
I
especially
agree.
on that note, I think from the way you are sharing, I can feel this collection can be therapeutic. Can be taken to some
absolutely,
workshops,
yeah,
poetry
absolutely,
workshops, or a psychologist doing workshops. That's where you must try to get your book to. It can really bring you many readers, new readers,
Mm-hmm.
and
go
reviews.
go to go
Yes.
to sessions like there are not just psychiatry, but there are sessions like yoga sessions which focus on trauma yoga and
Yes,
trauma
Mm-hmm.
therapy and
yeah.
like any trauma healing where they use music for healing. All
Mm.
that, just
Poetry can
take the
be
poems
one. Yes,
to those to those places,
Absolutely, I agree.
and it will definitely reach places. And I'm sure because those are people who are open to
yes.
understand things from outside, and those are
Mm-hmm.
people who are open to share it as well. So
That is
take it to those places.
that side of thing. Those they will benefit. They will have something to take away from
Absolutely,
this. They will have
yes.
some of their sorrow dissolving or dissipating away after reading. So you'll be doing them something more than you might even imagine.
Yes, and to kind of bounce off of what both of you were just saying, in terms of the the collection or poetry in general being having a therapeutic quality, I I find that the therapeutic quality comes from the vulnerability,
Yes.
and vulnerability is very hard. It was very hard for me in the beginning. Now it's easy. I have strengthened my vulnerability muscles so that vulnerability becomes more natural for me.
Mm.
But in the beginning, it was not. However, I have found now, after having exercised my vulnerability very often, that I have not intentionally been vulnerable and have ever regretted it. I have
Mm.
never looked back and said, oh, I wish I hadn't shared that thing. I
Mm.
have found actually that every time that I have been willing to open my heart and expose myself in that way and be vulnerable with someone else, that the only thing that has come from it is deeper connection, deeper empathy, and possibly healing for the other person as well, and for them
Mm.
to feel connected and more empathetic as well.
Mm. Mm. And like you rightly pointed out at the start of the session itself, writing is cathartic. Like writing is it's like self therapy, and especially when you're going through trauma, we all have answers within ourselves. We all have our own answers. We all know that when we go to a therapist, the reason that we go there is we're just going to tell them our grief, and I'm very sure none of us are going to take things that doesn't resonate with us. The therapist is Yeah, so even if we go to a therapist and she's going to give us 10 ways to cope with that, we're going to take what actually we think is right, like we're going to take
Mhm.
what is inside us. We are through a therapist, we are finding answers which we already know, we're just seeking her validation to our own answers. That's all we
Mhm.
do in therapy. And I think that's what we would do when we write our feelings as well. We validate our own feelings, we validate our own solutions to it. And when we do it, I'm very sure when we write about it, we're going to come up with a minimum of 3 solutions to the same problem. And it's going to
Mhm.
be
Mhm.
the one we would already know. We know this is what we feel, and we know, like, this is what I'm going to do. But there are going to be two things which are so jarring, so different from our natural state of being, and we're going to be surprising ourselves and think, can my mind even think this, like how was I able to say this or feel this? I think that's the beauty of writing or any form of art,
Mhm.
because art doesn't just shock the reader or the seer, it shocks the creator itself. It just shows you that there are parts of you which you don't even know about yourself.
I agree.
Especially dealing with grief and emotions that are strong, it's going to be showing
Mhm.
strength within you, which you never knew you had. It's going to be showing a form of deep love that you never thought you were even
Yes.
capable of feeling. And how
Mhm.
I know that while you were putting those in words, more than the parts that you knew about yourselves, it is hard to write these parts, these new parts. It's very hard because you don't know what it is. And you yourself are exploring those parts, and it's kind of confusing at times. You're like, what, how should I do this? How should I write? What words would suit this? Because it's new. So, and
Mhm.
because right now the emotions that you were expressing in them were also new, because it was grief. It's not like it's not love like that you would feel every day and you know how it's grief. It's going to be once in a lifetime and it's too traumatic. So how did you cope with that confusion of how to write that new feeling into words, or to find the right words to exactly, express what you are feeling at that moment in time?
I'll add one more to
Yeah,
it. I'll add one
sure.
more to it. Those verses when you got to read it later on after a few months, did you get the same feeling from
Yeah,
those words,
exactly.
or were you again blank? Did I write these? What did I mean those time when I wrote? Did you have
Yeah,
that kind?
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
I like both of those questions. Um, yes. So to write about an experience that I have never gone through before and ex finding the words to describe my emotions and these new emotions. I had never experienced grief at this level before. Um, I was naive to it. And I would say that it was very awkward and fumbling at first. I didn't know how to write about it. Saying, I'm so sad, I'm sadder than I can even describe, like very generic, uh, because I was too close to it to be able to describe it poetically. I just needed to get it out in the first place as a catharsis, like you were mentioning before. I just needed the catharsis to just say, I am sadder than I've ever been in my life. Then from there, I think it was more just describing the facts. I can't get out of bed. I can't take a shower. I don't eat. Then I eat an entire can of Pringles in one go. I have no interest in joy. I have no interest in watching movies or going for walks or showing
Life.
affection to my partner. Yeah. And so writing all of that down, kind of like as a list, even
Mm, mm,
just just saying the facts. Then later on, when I am more functioning, I'm able to hold my grief and my life at the same time. Whereas before I could only hold one, and I was holding grief only. Once I learned how to be able to hold both of them at the same time, then I was able to go back and look at those poems and say, yes, now I have the words for it. Now that I have a clearer mind, I can go in and go into those skeletons of pieces. There are many poems that didn't make it into this collection because they were just they were the stepping stones I needed to climb on top of to find the real poems that I wanted to put in the collection. And to answer your question, Gianthi, I did go back when I read it the second time, and when I read my book start to finish when it was printed, I did feel the same. That hollowness, that sinking feeling that I was feeling at the time writing it came back. It was like, you know, when you smell something and it brings you to your childhood, when you like a certain food or like a certain perfume, and then suddenly you're transported into a new time or like a past time. That's how it felt for me reading these poems and reading even this like newer version of these blog posts that I had originally written. Reading them again, even in these transformed way, made me feel hollow, just the way that I had felt when I was writing them. Made me feel sick to my stomach, the way that I was always sick to my stomach. And I cry, missing my father. And also, you know, when you read a story and you already know the ending and you're just kind of dreading finding out how it happens.
Just wishing that it doesn't happen also.
Wishing that it doesn't happen. That's how I felt reading my writing from the perspective when my father hadn't yet passed away, when I only knew of his diagnosis and then watching him deteriorate. Remembering what that anticipation felt like, but now knowing also what the other side felt like, I just felt even worse for that past version of myself. I just wanted to hug her, saying, you don't even know how eviscerated you're about to feel. You don't even know. You think that you feel the worst that you could possibly feel right now, and you are so wrong. And I just want to hug her because she has no idea what's about to come for her. And it's weird thinking about myself as a character in a book. It's weird to see myself as like almost separate from who I am now. And so rereading it and still rereading it when I had my my book launch in April, and my friends and family were there on Zoom. It was a virtual, and I was reading excerpts from the book. Even then, reading excerpts from the book, even just, you know, a month and a half ago, still gives me that, like, I get a tightness in my sternum reading it. And it's a good feeling and a bad feeling. You know, it's kind of like scratching a mosquito bite, where it like kind of hurts when you're scratching it, but it also feels like a relief. That's how it feels, where it's like I need to share this, and I know that it's going to help other people, and I'm not disassociated from it. I'm still in it when I'm reading it. And during the book launch, I had to turn my mother's video off. Even before I started, I just knew that if I started seeing her cry, that I would just lose it, and I needed to get through. I needed to get through.
Mm-mm.
So I even before I started, I turned her video off, and my partner who was with me, he went in the other room because I knew if I even heard him sniffling that I would lose it. And I was trying to keep it together in that moment. But still, when I read some of these poems, I do still cry, or at least feel the sting in my eye that I'm about to cry. Or I have dreams with my father in it, and I wrote about two different ones in my book. One that was more of a nightmare and one that was a nice dream. And I still have dreams with my father in it. And even I would say maybe a month ago, I had a dream with him in it, and I woke up sobbing because I missed him. I was hugging him in my dream in our in the kitchen in the childhood home that I grew up in, that you know we don't have anymore and other people live in it, I'm sure, but we were in my childhood home, and he was sitting at the kitchen table, and I had my arms wrapped around him, hugging him. And in my dream, I knew that it was special. I knew it wasn't that he was still alive in my dream. I knew that he was visiting. And I still write poems about that. So I just wrote a poem about that dream, actually, maybe like a day or two ago. And I still cry. As I'm writing the poem about this dream, I still cry. And I think that that's just, I think I always will. And I remember after my father passed away, maybe 1 or 2 days after, my mom told me her mother passed away when I was 3 weeks old, and I'm almost 37 now. So 36 years ago, at the time that my father passed away, I was 33. And she said, "My mother has been gone for 33 years. I still cry for my mother. And 33 years from now, you will still cry for your father." And I believe that that's true. I believe that that's true. And I know other people, they might not have the same kinds of relationships with their parents, but they will know loss in that way. They will have lost a friend, they will have lost a partner, and it'll be 33 years later, and they'll still be crying for that person that they lost, or a sibling, maybe, or just anybody who was dear to them. Everybody is going to experience that
Absolutely.
that excruciating pain of separation in that way, permanent separation.
You told us about the book being edited after the publishing deal was done, and you're taking away a few poems, adding a few poems. I'm sure when you were doing that, there were poems where you thought, I mean, not this poem, please, not this poem. I mean, this is too close to my heart. I can't take this away. So, what did you feel when you were taking away poems? And because before you put in the other poems, I'm sure there were poems that you had to retouch and like change words and like make it a bit more publishable, right? So how did that edit
Absolutely.
go? Because it's too personal. It's too personal of a thing to because every word means something much 10 layers deeper than what it is written about. So how did that editing process go with
I
you,
will
and how
add one
long
more
did
to
it
it. I will add one more to it. Because when you wrote it, you were a
fresh?
ball of emotions. Now when you're doing it, your intellect leads. So do you think a change of word is required? Did you have such a dilemma editing it?
Yeah.
Both good, very good questions. So to answer the first question, taking things away, I never see it as, that expression that many people say, kill your darlings. It's a very common expression when people talk about editing their writing. I don't kill any of my darlings. None of my darlings get murdered. Instead, I have a document on my computer called the Poem Incubator.
Oh,
It's where they just go to incubate a little bit more. They just need more time before they can hatch.
I love that.
And so none of my darlings get killed. They just get replaced into the incubator, and then I'll do
To
something
be
else with them.
nourished, to be
So they can
nourished.
be birthed again.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, then they'll have
They'll
a
be.
rebirth. Exactly, reincarnation, right? And what I tell my poetry students, because now I'm a poetry teacher with the same class that my friend insisted that I take, that helped me create this collection. Now I'm an instructor for that class. And what I tell my students who they're curating their collection, maybe they have 150 pages now, and we're trying to get 100. So it's like now they're like 50% extra, and they just want to put every single poem that they have ever written into this collection because they see it as their end all be all, and this is going to be the only time in their life that they're ever going to be able to put their poems out there for people to read. I try to I not try to, I do encourage them to believe they will have more than one book. That if they have more than one book in them, they will have more than one book. To not see this one book as your only chance. It's not your only chance. And so that makes it a lot easier to take poems out, even if I love them, even if I love the poems, because I tell myself, you will have another book. You will have another book, and maybe that poem belongs there. Maybe that poem will never be in a book, but there are open mics. I have poems that I love that are not in this book that I recite at open mics. People like them. They give me the
Or maybe
snaps.
they just do, maybe they're just meant for just you, just the
Or
author,
maybe
just the
they're just meant for me.
yeah.
Yes. I love that. Yes, exactly. Their home can be different places. Their home doesn't need to
Absolutely.
be in the one book. And that helps me to say not goodbye, but maybe see you later, or like, or
Mhm,
just acknowledge, okay, this one poem isn't right for this
mhm.
piece right now. And I think that is just helpful for anyone with anything that they write, that if they really love something, they don't have to kill their darling. They don't have to do that. They don't have to get rid of it. They can put it somewhere else, and maybe it'll be um maybe that, and this has happened for me too, is that I write a poem, the poem isn't quite working, but I use just a line from it, or I
Exactly, yeah.
use the concept that I'm trying to come across, and then it ends up being a whole new poem, but that same concept is the centerpiece of the poem. So you never know what is the springboard. Not
Mhm,
every poem is the pool. Some poems are the springboard into the pool.
mhm.
And so that helps me also to cut, or to say, okay, this isn't quite right for this collection, which I took out a number of pieces, all of my pieces about my relationship, and some of them were beautiful. Some of the poems were
You make it
beautiful.
another collection in the future.
Right.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll have a
versus
collection
on
of only love poems.
relationships. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
And maybe there's another collection in me that's going to be only uh love poems, breakup poems, makeup poems. Maybe that's where they'll live.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
who
Look
know?
forward
Who
to. Yeah, yeah,
knows?
you should, you should maintain folders based on themes, so you will know.
So I just have one more question. After that, we go to the next segment of the session. Okay. What I wanted to know was, because you told us that you were a playwright before you started writing poems, and so this is your first take on poems, that you have played other roles as a writer. So how did your experience as a playwright help you, make these poems come to life? Because
Mm-hmm.
those are two different forms of writing. Playwrights have a more structure. It's a different type of writing. It's having the audience in your mind. It's visualizing it so much. But while you write poetry, it's more of internalizing. It's more of, it's more personal. So how was it? Did your playwriting experience help you in this poetry, or was it maybe sometimes you felt the playwright, showing its head too much, and you were like, can you please just be calm for a while so that I can, I can be a poet for a while. So
So, I mean, you
That's a
can
really
also,
great
I'm
question.
adding, today I'm adding. So, in your opinion, what makes your verses stand out? Are they the, figuratives, metaphors, symbols, imagery? What, in your opinion, is making your verses?
USP of your,
Yeah.
Okay. To start with the first question, I'm not sure if my playwriting experience really helped with this collection. The reason why I say that is because I wrote almost exclusively comedies. I wrote like slapstick, situational, punny, cutesy, like rom-com type plays. That doesn't appear in this collection at
The
all.
emotion
Though,
here is a contrast.
yeah, and my plays are also very dialogue heavy, of course. That's the whole point of a play. And my collection is almost entirely internal. There is some dialogue, but it's sparse. It's mostly just my internal monologue. So I will say, though, my experience with playwriting allowed me to see a blank page. It's not the very first time I'm ever seeing a blank page. I've seen blank pages in the past. It's not my first time putting my work out there, hoping that my audience, this time a reader versus a live audience, will be receptive to it or quote unquote get it. I know what I kind of know that process of creating and then waiting to see what people think about it. And so that feels familiar. That's not brand new to me. And so I think that it helped me in that way to at least be ready for that. Though I wouldn't say any of the content that I have written in the past had any kind of influence or help on this. It's very different. In fact, if people know my work as a playwright, probably only people who are in the Wyoming area where most of my plays were written and produced. If they read this collection, they might be like, huh? This is like very dark and different from what all of what I've seen from her as a writer in the past. Then to answer the follow-up question, I think what makes my poetry stand out, two things I'll say. That one is I love to utilize the page. When you flip through my book, you're not going to just see poems that are left justified aligned only in a brick of text or maybe couplets or things like that. You're really going to see words all over the page, especially with the memoir and verse part. There's words left, right, center. I have poems that are concrete poems. I have one that's shaped in a hot air balloon. I have one poem that starts at the bottom left-hand corner of the page and then arcs up to the top right corner of the page.
Oh, okay.
I have a poem that starts in the center and then the font becomes fainter. It like fades away and it like kind of disintegrates on the page. And so I think that I have titles at the beginning of the poem, but I also have titles at the end of the poem. And actually, I'm writing poems right now that I'm experimenting with putting the titles in the center of the poem. The rules are there are no rules.
I mean, those are
So,
layout, interesting way to lay out, and they are interesting when I'm hearing. I wanted to know about the imagery or what you're using in your verses. Do you have any?
Yes. So the first thing I think is the layout is interesting. The
Okay.
second thing that I think makes my poetry maybe unique to me is that I really try to use accessible conversational language.
Okay.
I don't try, like, I want it to be beautiful. Sure, I'll use metaphor, but I try not to use these like
Complicated.
complicated.
Yeah.
I don't want my poems to be cryptic. I don't want my poems. No college professor is going to use my poem to then analyze and find what the deeper meaning is, and because the meaning is there, I say it out loud. You don't have to guess what my poem is about. I tell you what my poem is about. So I think that is also what makes my poet, and I know other poets do this as well. So I know that I'm not the only one who writes more conversationally or um, more accessibly to the broader audience. But that's what I hope that people find. I would be surprised if someone picked up this collection and read it and said, I really was confused about what was happening, or I really didn't understand what you meant by this. I really tried to not be overly emotive to the point where it felt I've read poetry collections in the past where I felt like the poet was maybe trying to show like how creative or how smart they are by like being overly um uh overly cryptic or secretive, or you will never guess what this poem is really about. I don't feel like I connect to those poetry collections. I connect more to poetry collections that are more narrative, that tell a story, that when I'm reading it, I feel like I'm right there with the speaker of the poem, experiencing what they're experiencing. And that's what I tried to do in my collection as well. And that's what comes out of me naturally as a poet. So I hope that comes across. So I think that
Yes,
that's
yes. Yeah, yeah.
what people can expect.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. That's true. So we come to the end of session. We have, the W questions. To put it simply, it's Danya's idea. It's for the listeners, viewers who are very in a hurry. They don't want to spend all the time listening or
So it's
watching
for
the
the word
whole.
of
They
the
can
week.
just scroll down to the end and they can get the gist of it. So let me begin this with a question. When can
Word of
we
W.
expect, yes, World of W it is called, and when can we expect a grieving script from you and a rom-com in verses from you?
Oh my goodness. I'm not sure because I have so many other works in progress right now. So I'm not sure you're going to get those anytime soon. But
Yeah.
um, the current collection is available now. So it did launch in April and it's available now. My next work in progress is a larger collection on the concepts of um, infertility and pregnancy loss, and individuals struggle through wanting to become a parent and it not happening. And it's
Oh,
influenced by my own experience, but then also my friends and families' experiences, utilizing their stories to then inspire poems. And it's not a memoir in verse. It's all just poetry. And the chapbook version of it is coming out in spring 2024.
Brilliant.
But the full length collection, TBD, still in progress.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay. Where can our readers and listeners find your books and your work your social media
Mhm.
handles. If you can tell us your website
Sure.
and social media handles, please.
Yes. So they can find my book on curiouscorvidpublishing.com. They can also find it on Amazon. It's there as well. And I have links to both of those places on my website, AnneMarieWellsWriter.com. And it's Anne with an E. So I know that some people have a hard time finding me because they type Anne without the E. So it's Anne with
Oh,
an
okay.
E,
And with the E. And with
MarieWellsWriter.com. And
and with
you
the
can
E.
find me on Facebook and
Mhm.
Instagram at Anne Marie Wells Writer. I try to be consistent with it. So Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, I'm at Anne Marie Wells Writer, and also on YouTube. So I have
On
some
that,
YouTube things.
and as you were touching on the social media, let's ask, how has social media helped you reach your readers? I mean, reach this particular book to the readers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, good question. So definitely social media has been helpful. Reaching audience readers that I don't know. So Curious Corvid, my publisher, they of course have their own social network and their own loyal fans who are
Oh,
interested
okay.
in purchasing books through them.
Mm-hmm,
So all of their loyal fans who have no idea who I am then
mm-hmm,
get
mm-hmm,
exposed to my writing through them.
mm-hmm,
And then also through the other groups that I am part of, the Community Literature Initiative promoted
mm-hmm.
my book when it was coming out and promoted my book launch when it was going out. And then, of course, my friends who love me, my sister who loves me, my partner who loves me, then share my book information, the website to buy it at, or if I'm doing a workshop, then they share it with their network. And that is so helpful.
Yeah.
Like the word of mouth is
Yes.
so helpful. Then it's like, oh, this person that I know likes this book. Maybe I would be interested in it. Or recommendations that way are just, really key, especially when you're an indie author and you don't have one of these top 5 publishers spending thousands of dollars publishing and promoting your book for you. When you're a hustler and you're doing it yourself, having as many hands on deck to help you spread the word is really key to finding the success that you're looking for. Mhm.
Uh, what is like you've already told us what your next work in progress is about and when it is coming out. But we would like to know, in the meantime, like, have you also been writing plays, and can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a playwright? Just like a few words.
I haven't written a play in quite a long time. The last couple plays that I wrote never saw the stage. They were published in literary magazines, which was nice. That then I could at least say that they did something and went somewhere. But I haven't written a play in a long time. That's not to say that I never will again. Um, I just have been focusing my energies elsewhere. I do have another memoir that is prose, my travel log about traveling through Iceland that I'm still working on. It
Okay,
has found a home with an indie press, but it's
that's good.
still in the editing process, so it hasn't quite made it into the world yet. But that just another one of those works of progress, you know.
Yes.
Hmm.
So, what are your last words to the aspirants and viewers out there in LOL? And what was your experience talking with us today?
Oh my gosh, you two are both lovely to talk to and ask such thoughtful questions that um, I feel very deeply connected to you now. I
So
feel like
sweet.
sh we've shared something beyond just
Yes.
the writing craft, talking about human experience. And if I had to share any words of wisdom with other writers or poets, it would just be to, you know, tell the truth, to just be honest
Mm.
and just say what you have to say without holding it back, without um necessarily worrying about, oh, what are they going to think of me if they know this truth about me. There are going to be other people who have that same truth and who will deeply value knowing someone else has experienced or felt or seen the same things. And so, yeah, just to also have the willingness to be vulnerable, to put it out there, because it's one thing to write it,
Yeah.
and writing it can be helpful for you. Writing it can be cathartic and therapeutic, but having the courage and the willingness to be vulnerable to then put it out to other people,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the next step.
Yeah. It's a, thank you so much. Let's keep
Thank
connected.
you both.
Off camera, on camera. Either way, we can keep connecting in future. So you're
Thank
on
you.
board
Yes.
in the literary expanding literary community. You're on board.
Mhm.
Welcome. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Bye.
for having me. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Good night.